news broke, as expected, I would say. I think this has been kind of had a feeling of inevitability since December that Cleveland would be parting ways with head coach JB Bickerstaff, which I'm just going to say from the jump, it always felt weird to me that the Cavs kind of intentionally fumbled the last game of the regular season in order to get into the 4-5 preferable matchup to advance in the postseason, to then fire the coach that would have taken them further than they've ever gone without LeBron in 2 decades. Because it has seemed clear through the intel channels around the league that Bickerstaff was not someone that Donovan Mitchell and other players were behind. And that is a key ingredient to Cleveland's offseason, as the entire league will wait to see if Donovan agrees to a contract extension. He becomes eligible to sign, which is roughly 4 years, $200 billion, give or take, which will be a huge domino in the overall offseason landscape that we will touch on even more after the ad break, after we do a little Cavs analysis here. Because look, you have the numbers in our rundown: 170, 159 record, 517 win percentage over 4+ seasons, and they've gotten better every year. So this is clearly not and I'm sorry to just point the finger where it seems obviously to be pointed. Like, this is not this guy didn't get us far enough situation. So I have some names to say, but I just in the interest of not me talking for 2 straight minutes, what was your initial thoughts here on Bickerstaff being dismissed?
Yeah, I think we talked about it after the Cavs got eliminated in last week's show, and I think there's a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're right. They've gotten better year over year under JB Bickerstaff. He gets fired after a season where he only had his core guys, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen, together for 32 of their 94 total games. They still win 48 games. They still get a top 4 seed, and they still win a playoff series. But I think it's understandable. Like, there's the X's and O's kind of schematic idea, and then there's also just like the interpersonal stuff. I think it's reasonable to look at their offense and the way that their team performed and say it should be better than this. The talent did not surpass the sum of its parts in terms of the way the offensive structure was working. Still too much your turn, my turn. Obviously a stagnant season for Darius Garland, so on and so forth. Really what it comes down to, though, I think you're right. Like, if you're not getting what you need to get out of the players, if the players aren't listening, right? If the message is falling on deaf ears, if they don't have confidence in what you're presenting to them, rightly or wrongly, like maybe JB Bickerstaff, maybe they should be more, whatever, but it's immaterial at a certain point. Like, if they are not comfortable in that, if they're not confident in it, then the message isn't going to get across, and somebody else needs to be delivering them, whether the message is dramatically different or not. And so, similar to what we heard about, what we talked about with Darvin Ham in LA or with Frank Vogel in Phoenix, like, the responsibility falls on the coach. He's the one that falls on the sword, but it's about, can you connect with the players? Can you maximize what you're getting out of them? And it remains to be seen who will be able to get more out of that structure. But if job one is keep Donovan Mitchell, keep him happy, and if the state of affairs was whether it's Mitchell himself or multiple players in the locker room or whatever, the reporting has been kind of anonymous and mixed and varied. But like, if you need to do whatever, give yourself the best chance of making that guy happy enough to keep around. And if a new offensive voice and structure is needed, that JB Bickerstaff winds up being the cost of doing business for that. And it's an ugly bit of business, but it's not the first time that's happened.
Yeah, it's a really pivotal offseason for this front office, where Kobe Altman got an extended, forget exactly when over the last couple of years, but in this post-Donovan Mitchell trade era. And this big 4 that they've put together is clearly super talented, but the fit questions have obviously been there in both the backcourt and the front court, which we discussed last week. It's interesting, though, being that, like, if it's hard to recall, but JB Bickerstaff is another guy just like Jock Vaughn in Brooklyn, where he was the interim head coach after John Beilein resigned during
Beilein,
that disastrous Cavs year. And he did a good job and he kept the gig. Like, this has not really been, I mean, the Beilein situation was what it was, but this hasn't really been a job that this front office has went out and had a coaching search for half a decade now. So that's, I mean, definitely not since before they had Donovan Mitchell. The proverbial thinking around the league is kind of like, as far as scapegoating goes, and that's not to say this is necessarily what's happening here, but the front office fires, it's the same thing happening in Brooklyn. Front office fires the coach, and then will you get to hire another one is kind of the next question in the line of questioning that doesn't count in the other line of questioning. Do you get that reference? Do you get that
Wow. One? No, I don't, but I feel like I'm trapped in my own mind, which is pretty good.
That's from Austin Powers with Will Ferrell playing the role of Mustafa.
Oh, I got, maybe I'm due for a rewatch. It's been a little while.
He has to answer a question if you ask it 3 times in a row. That's kind of the
the okay. That's right. I forgot that was a good bit. I mostly remember him falling into a pit and then talking about how much he was being burned.
The wound is beginning to smell a little like almonds. If you could send down some antibacterial cream. Austin Powers is canon in my household. So anyway,
I'm not here to suggest that it shouldn't be. We'll see.
How many podcasts are you going to get an Austin Powers impression right before I tell you that the names I'm hearing to replace JB Bickerstaff? Kenny Atkinson seems to be the leader in the clubhouse right now. His connection to Karis LeVert and Jared Allen from the Brooklyn days, I don't think are the connective pieces here. Being that Jared Allen, I think, is pretty widely expected to be available in trade conversations this summer. That's not to say that Cleveland's going to be shopping him, but that's to say there are plenty of teams who have interest, most notably the New Orleans Pelicans, I can say from my conversations. We've known that for years now. And there will be others for sure, especially as we've been talking about how all these teams that are still left are goddamn huge. And the fit with Evan and him just obviously has not been optimal. But James Borrego, Dave Yeager are 2 other former head coaches that I am being told are going to be under consideration here. The 4th name that I've been texted just now, and I've heard through the ether previously, would also go to the Donovan Mitchell of it all, Johnny Bryant, former Utah assistant, who was Donovan's guy, who worked for the Knicks, who many viewed that as a connective piece potentially before they would have acquired him instead of going to Cleveland. So those are the 4 names I've got. I'm sure there'll be others, but it does seem like, I mean, the bulk of these names are proven or guys who have done it before, which would seem to be the case. I don't think this team that got to the second round and was dissatisfied with the performance of the head coach for various other reasons that we, obviously discussed, is going to go give this to some first-time guy unless there's some real connectivity between that franchise and the players involved and what have you. So it'll be interesting to see which one emerges. This has been probably one of the dizzier coaching cycles in recent memory to me, being that a lot of these have kind of waited a little while, even though things have been expected and whatnot, and the Wizards' job is still ongoing. Kenny Atkinson was definitely a name involved in the Wizards search, and there was a lot of thought around the league that like his next job post Brooklyn after being years in Golden State, kind of similar to Mike Brown in Sacramento, even though obviously that team went right and got the 3 seed, and now they're not getting the 3 seed as part of that equation, but that's getting off task. There was definitely expectation around the league that like Kenny's next job would be one of those more developmental, team on the up and up, which in theory Cleveland still kind of is, but there's obvious expectations there now. So that would be a much different circumstance, probably a better circumstance, I would say, for Kenny Atkinson personally, probably to even like shed that I'm a rebuild guy label. So yeah, I mean, Borrego's obviously been characterized as like the number 2 choice behind JJ Redick in Los Angeles. He was involved in Brooklyn. So his name's been super hot this coaching cycle as well, after being the lead assistant in New Orleans this year. Dave Yeager joined Doc Rivers in Milwaukee midseason and has kind of been doing a little rehabilitation after his flame out with Sacramento, first with Doc in Philly and other places, what have you. Definitely like of this list, he's kind of like the outside the box thinker by reputation that could, in theory, just like we're talking about the Chris Finch 4-5 pick and rolls, that could figure out something to do with this lineup as currently constructed, try to figure out a better synergy with the 2 guards and the 2 bigs. But this is so early, and we will figure out more later, because again, this news just broke right before we started recording. This is pretty much all I can give you at this juncture.
Yeah, the only thing that just immediately made me like had to cast my mind back, like, oh right, Dave Yeager coached those like Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, Memphis teams. Also, the only guy of this group that we're talking about that's won a playoff series, right? Like, James Borrego not in Charlotte, Kenny Atkinson not in Brooklyn. So like, but yeah, I don't have any new original thoughts to add on that, except that the names that we're talking about and the initial sort of forwarded suggestions don't jump off the page as like JB Bickerstaff got us to the precipice of being able to get over the hump. These are the guys with the proven track record to be able to do it, right? Like, not a whole lot of postseason success in that group, not a ton of proven experience deep into the so it's interesting. I think where I landed last week was, again, like, I understood the arguments for moving on from JB Bickerstaff, but also so be careful what you wish for, because the grass is not always greener with whoever you bring in, and so that's where Cleveland clearly felt. I mean, I think the fact that the immediate aftermath of their season ending was like knives out stories suggested that even no matter how long they took and how carefully they thought out their coaching situation, it seemed like it was pointing toward a pretty clear endpoint, and now we have arrived at it.